All right. So glass, improving recycling and upcycling in our community. So I'm going to be talking tonight about kind of why we should care to begin with, right? That's the baseline foundation, what we're doing, and then looking ahead at different options. So first of all, why should we care? So when I think about the reasons behind glass, I often think about it in comparison to plastic packaging. And plastic, as we all know, has huge environmental and health impacts. We see it wherever we go. I was just reminiscing or thinking about in my garden the other day that instead of picking out rocks in our gardens, we pick out pieces of plastic and how that has shifted over time. And so we need to kind of go back and find other ways and rethink what we're using for packaging. And glass is one of the greatest opportunities for that. So why not plastic? So we see plastic pollution everywhere because oftentimes it breaks down so easily. It breaks down and forms microplastics that get into our waterways, it gets into our landscapes, gets into our soils. And then also, plastic oftentimes is designed for single use. So we live in a consumerist culture that utilizes single-use plastics, and sometimes they go into the garbage, sometimes they go to the garbage and then the roadways, but a lot of it we see strewn around. So that single-use kind of thought is something also that we need to rethink as a culture and a society. How can we really value the resources? So when we have something that's single use, we don't think about what goes into it, the manufacturing that goes into it, the raw resources that go into it. But when we have something that we value, right, say it's our favorite cup or our favorite sweater, maybe we think about more what goes into that. Maybe it's the wool that goes into it, or it's the raw materials. So how do we put value onto the things that we're using? And that's really part of Waste Loop's mission, is valuing all things, all resources through their entire life cycle. And then also the aspect of glass as not being harmful or toxic. So a lot of plastics that we use, particularly for beverage and food containers, can leach harmful chemicals into the food that we're eating. And so glass as an inert material doesn't leach harmful material or harmful chemicals into what we're eating and drinking. So it's safer on our environment and safer on our bodies. So going back to the basics, every environmentalist kind of has to put this up once again, because we often get focused on one thing, right? So we can really easily get focused on recycling as the thing to do. But really we have to step back and think about how can we rethink about what we're doing in the first place? Do we actually need to be utilizing, the resources that we're utilizing? Can we refuse buying that new thing? And then can we reduce how much we're purchasing or buying or utilizing, especially that single-use plastic or anything really that's single-use? Can we refuse to use that? Can we reduce them? And then can we reuse those things? So plastic can only be reused a certain amount of time before it breaks down, and then it can no longer be reused. It degrades every single time that it's reused. Glass, on the other hand, does not degrade, and so we can continue to reuse it time after time. Lower on the hierarchy is recycling and compost. So these are great options, of course, but we have to remember to start at the top and work our way down. And last but not least is responsible disposal. So if we are throwing something away, making sure that it actually goes into the garbage. So I like to come back to this time and time again, and really start with that rethink, because we get stuck in our systems oftentimes, and recycling is another system that puts the burden on the consumer. So how can we rethink the system to begin with? So we'll come back to this. So once again, glass is 100% recyclable and can be upcycled or recycled endlessly. Unlike plastic and other materials, it does not degrade, which is amazing. Also with recycled glass, it can replace up to 95% of raw materials. So some of the raw materials that go into glass include limestone and soda ash and fespir, and sand, of course. And so glass, when you use recycled glass, it can replace 95% of those raw materials, which is a great opportunity. I talked a little bit about this already, that it's an inert, non-toxic packaging option, so it won't leach those harmful chemicals into whatever you're eating or drinking. And it saves between 20 to 30% on energy and up to 50% on CO2 emissions. And this is because it takes less energy to heat it up. And so when they are manufacturing, say, a new glass bottle, they have to heat up the material in order to get it into that new form. And when you're using recycled content, you don't have to heat it up to the same degree. So it actually saves energy and saves on those CO2 emissions. And so glass recycling is a great option for all of these things. So those are kind of the main facets of why. Why should we care? Why are we even looking at glass recycling to begin with? And so where is the challenge? Why are we not recycling glass? And so in 2019, the unincorporated Chelan County, as well as Leavenworth, had glass removed from the waste management guidelines. And a lot of people said, wait a second, whoa, 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 why is this happening? But little did we know about the infrastructure behind it. There was never infrastructure really to support the glass recycling that was happening to begin with. So all of our recycling right now gets transported all the way over to Spokane, Washington. So anything that you put into your single stream recycling bin gets transported over there. And as you can see in this image, and I'll zoom in on the Northwest, but in Washington, we do have a MRF, which is MRF, which is a materials sorting facility, which is where they sort the recyclables. We do have one in Spokane. You can see that dark dot on eastern Washington. And then you can see all the way over through the states that there's no infrastructure for glass recycling, glass processing, glass manufacturers. And so the further you get away from those glass manufacturers and glass processors, the harder and harder it is to actually recycle, because it's cost prohibitive is the biggest thing. Glass is extremely heavy, and so to transport all of that material to these processors is challenging. It's not impossible, of course, right? We have creative and innovative solutions to some of these problems, but it is really challenging. And so what was being sent to Spokane at that time was actually being used as a landfill cover. And so it was going into beneficial reuse, but it wasn't actually being recycled. And so that's why they removed it from the guidelines. And so community by community, the communities agreed that, yes, we are not able to recycle glass, and so we will remove it from our guidelines. And that's how it rolled out. And that's when we all threw up our hands and said, wait, what? I've been recycling glass since I was a child. What is going on? And so looking at this infrastructure map, it gives you a little lens into why there isn't a lot of opportunities, particularly in eastern Washington and east. Oops. And so zooming in, we look at the glass infrastructure in the Pacific Northwest at large. And so we see that there are glass manufacturers and glass processors that are fairly close by. So we have a unique opportunity with Strategic Materials in Seattle and then Portland Glass to Glass. Those are the closest facilities for glass manufacturing. And we're actually, with Strategic Materials, we are within that 200-mile radius. And so, and we'll talk about what we're doing now with hauling, but we are still in that sphere of being environmentally and economically sound to haul it to these locations. Whereas Spokane, where our recycling was going, was not environmentally or economically sound at the time for recycling. So that's where we are. Any questions on that so far?
I thought there was a MRF in Woodinville. Was that a long time ago?
So that's a really great point. Anything west of the Cascades, they kind of have their own sphere for recycling. And so there are MRFs in Western Washington that we don't have access to and that Waste Management does not utilize. Even though it may be closer by mileage, our current haulers don't utilize them. Yeah, so that's a really good point. And that's also one of the aspects when people say, well, I thought, X, Y, or Z was recyclable. And yes, it may be recyclable on the west side where those sorting facilities are different and have different technologies, but all of our recyclables, pretty much all of Eastern Washington, everything east of the Cascades goes to the same sorting facility in Spokane. And so we all have the same restrictions and same guidelines in Eastern Washington. Yeah. Any other questions about kind of this map? Yeah.
We got one online.
Yeah.
Does CO2 savings take into the full life cycle? Is that taken into the full life cycle or just the smelting process of the glass?
My understanding, it's the full life cycle, so taking into account the extraction of those raw materials. Although, thinking about the extraction and of all of those natural resources, I'm sure there would be additional data out there that would show the benefits even more, because these are finite resources. All of these raw materials that we're utilizing are finite. And so if you added, numbers onto those, I'm sure the cost savings and the environmental benefit would be even more. All right, so that's where we're at with the map of infrastructure in our area. So how did we get here? And I'm speaking on behalf of Waste Loop in Leavenworth. And so we started really with looking at two different waste diversion opportunities / challenges in our community. And one of them was glass. And that was because one of our founding members, like some good friends of ours, were the owners of Honey June, which is a local kombucha company that was manufacturing and producing kombucha or Honey June in glass bottles. And when the guidelines in 2019 removed glass recycling, they had tons of extra and broken glass that they no longer had a place to send them to. And at the same time, we were looking at food waste, and we said, okay, there's got to be something that can be done here. And so that's why glass was one of our focal points of what can we do. Soon after we said, okay, we're going to tackle this problem, we're going to start reaching out and see what other communities are doing, Sleeping Lady Resort donated a really small glass crusher that they had. And so we started crushing glass bottle by bottle. And so this image up on the screen is a picture of that crushed glass. It's also known as cullet. So we were really excited about this opportunity, but soon we were inundated. As we all know, if you live in Leavenworth or if you visited, we have a lot of glass. From the tasting rooms to the restaurants to just our personal use. We go through a ton of glass. And so we were inundated very soon after we started collecting glass. The other piece about it is that we had to remove the labels from the glass, which was really challenging and prohibitive to really scale up. And that's because most of the packaging labels include plastic in the labels. And so if you are to crush the glass, then what does it create? Once again, our problem with microplastics and microtrash. And so it was all time consuming and cost prohibitive and really challenging. And then the crusher broke. And so every time a challenge emerges, it creates innovation, right, and creativity. And so we leaned on some of our sister organizations, such as Methow Recycles, and we said, what are you doing? What have you done? They also started with a crusher, and then they started hauling to Strategic Materials in Seattle. And so we followed their lead, and we started organizing a way to collect and haul glass over to Seattle, to Strategic Materials. So that's a little bit of kind of where we started. We always thought we would get the crusher going again. It's still sitting in the shop. It does make beautiful crushed glass that can be reutilized just as any sand material can be utilized. But overcoming those humps of making it available to scale up was our biggest challenge.
Ariana, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So at a large scale, how do they deal with the labels?
That's a really great question. So in the really large scale glass manufacturing where they crush it in order to sell that cullet or to make a new bottle, oftentimes it's burned off. In other community scale crushing operations, sometimes it is like shaken off and gathered. During the crushing process, there will often be a lot of trash at the bottom. But from what I have found, and I've poured my hand through a lot of crushed glass, is that unless it's burned off, it will never actually fully go away. So there's always remnants of crushed, of those microplastics in there, which is really hard for me to apply that onto our landscape, right? Is if you know that there's microplastics in there, and so it becomes a barrier to scaling up those community kind of scale crushing operations. And that's why a lot of communities, including ourselves, chose not to stick with the crushing and go with the hauling instead. Yeah. So there could be, I think, like I said, every challenge comes with opportunities to innovate. And so I think finding ways to get rid of that micro trash is something that needs to be addressed for any crushing operation, because it does get minimized, but it's still there. All right. So the challenge is that the vast majority of glass in our community is not being recycled, upcycled, or reused. And that's why we're here to change it. Like I've mentioned before, so in Waste Loop, and I know a lot of you all are, here and have been community drivers because you have seen a challenge and you've addressed it head on. And you've worked with the community to work creatively and innovatively to help address that challenge. A couple of examples that I love, even on a small scale, right? Because there's really large scale, we're trying to do a lot. We're trying to tackle glass in all of the Wenatchee Valley and all of the state, in the nation, right? We're trying to fix these challenges. But then there's little small things that we can do. And a lot of businesses have some examples of that. We'll see if this clicker goes on. Here's a couple of examples. Infuse Organics in Leavenworth, they collect some of the wine bottles at the recycling center, and then they'll cut the wine bottles and pour candles in them. So it's a great beneficial reuse, and it sheds light, literally, on the recycling challenge. Another one in town, the Plant Ally, we collect bottles at not bottles, but jars at the recycling center for them to utilize to reuse for all of their beverages so that they can get rid of plastic and get rid of any single-use product that they're serving their beverages in. So there's like small wins left and right. Yeah.
Okay, so the composting presentation that was here.
Yeah.
There was a bill out to remove the labels on all the organic and the produce that we buy. Has those stickers, and the stickers are plastic. So somebody had to make a bill, and now they are removing, they cannot put those plastic stickers on our produce at some point in the very near future. Yeah. So can they do something stupid like a bill like that so that labeling on glass bottles will not include plastics?
Yes. I know. And there's all these things, right? We're like, why? Why isn't that there? Why is
it to be plastic on a label that goes on a bottle? Can you just say no?
Yes. Plastic plastic is amazing, right? And especially for beverages and food, because it's immersed in water, it goes, in your refrigerator. But yes, there are solutions, and we actually had paper labels, just paper for the longest time, right? And it's fine and it works out. So I'll get into some of the policy updates in a little bit. But that is a great example of places that we can continue to push forward to make these other steps easier, right? Because if it was just paper labels, then we can have more small-scale glass crushers. There's all of these steps, and sometimes we got to take 2 steps back before we take a step forward, or 3 or 4 back. So I just wanted to highlight those wins that we do have, and also to inspire individuals to have their own personal wins of, rethinking what we're using, and then how can you reuse those materials time and time and again. All of those steps you get to before recycling. All right, so diving in a little bit more for glass in our immediate community. Waste Loop did a waste characterization study for the commercial district of Leavenworth. And so what that looks like is we went to the Dryden transfer station and we collected samples from the commercial waste stream and sorted it out, and looked at what percentage all of these categories were taking in our waste stream. So as you can see in the graph, food and organic waste is a huge percentage, and we're so excited that this is being tackled right now through Winton's efforts and local businesses and restaurants that are moving towards composting. And then we have glass bottles as well. So we found that glass was close to 20% of the waste by weight, which is a huge portion for a very small town. And that's just one sample. If we were to look at, say, the downtown core, I would say that'd be even higher, considering the amount of restaurants and the tasting rooms that we have. I've gotten calls before of people saying, did you know that people are putting their boxes of glass bottles into the garbage? And I say, yep, I do. And we're trying really hard to solve that problem because it's not easy. It hasn't been made easy to recycle for businesses, especially to recycle your glass for businesses. And so we're working on reducing those barriers to make it easier. And so this is a great opportunity, right? This is a huge challenge, but a great opportunity to save thousands of dollars, $40,000 to $50,000 a year could be saved if we were to remove that from the waste stream. And I know what you're all thinking, right? That money could be spent on glass recycling or glass reuse or all of these other things. And that's a place where we could use the local community's voice in speaking up towards local government, because this is a snapshot of our entire community, right? Leavenworth, Kashmir, Wenatchee, Chelan County really has this opportunity if we were to divert glass out of the waste stream. All right, so at the recycling center, we have a contract with the city of Leavenworth to help manage and expand the operations there. So we're really grateful to be able to have that in the community. And since 2019, we have been able to collect and haul glass recycling. In 2023 alone, we collected and hauled 132,000 pounds of glass. And as you know, the recycling center is only open for 6 hours a week. That's very limited hours. We would love to expand, of course, and be able to collect more glass, but could you imagine if we were open 7 days a week, how much glass we'd have to haul, which would be great, but we have to be able to finance it, right? So we are trying our best and doing a lot of work. The other great thing is that the glass hauling is open to all residents outside of Leavenworth into Chelan County. If you can bring your glass to us, if you made that effort, thank you. good work. Thank you for being a responsible recycler. Please donate to help cover the cost. And so this is not just the Leavenworth community, and it's a scraping of the surface of businesses. We have a few businesses and a couple of tasting rooms that, when they have time, will bring their glass to us, but predominantly this is just individual community members that bring their glass to us. And so, once again, this is just scraping the surface of how much glass we could divert in our community. So if glass is almost 20% of the weight, we could be diverting thousands of pounds from the landfill every year. So where do we haul it? What are we doing? We're hauling it to Strategic Materials in Seattle. Strategic Materials is one of the largest glass manufacturers in North America. They have glass manufacturing throughout Canada, the US, and even Mexico. So because RDAG, which is a glass processor that makes new bottles, is almost next door to Strategic Materials, most of the glass that we collect and haul actually goes to create new glass bottles, which is great. Other products that are created from recycled glass at large include fiberglass, highway bead, abrasives, paint fillers, specialty glass, and more. And so these are just some examples of where glass goes into. But once again, our glass that we send predominantly goes to RDAG, which gets created into new bottles. And that's relatively close, so which is also really exciting, right? So aside from our cardboard recycling that we have in Wenatchee, glass recycling is the closest thing we have to creating this circular loop economy of producing something, utilizing something, and then remanufacturing and processing, producing, reusing, et cetera. And so we have the opportunity to contribute to that circular economy through glass recycling locally here. Okay, this image, okay, I'll pause for a second. That's a crazy image. So some people say, well, why don't we just go back to single stream glass collection? And there's single stream glass collection on the west side in many, many areas. Single stream undoubtedly creates more convenience for our society. But as we all know, as individuals and environmentalists, that convenience is not always key, right? Convenience equals those single-use products. Convenience equals a lot of trash. Convenience does not equal the most sustainable option always. So we get more people recycling, yes, which is great, but we also get a lot of wish cycling. So a lot of people putting things in that they just hope are recyclable. Maybe it contains a little bit of metal. Oh yeah, that can be recycled. Or maybe it contains plastic. Oh, I heard plastic was recyclable. But not everything is recyclable easily, right? So when it goes through the single stream, it goes through these large processing facilities, and they're only pulling out what is easily recyclable for their markets, right? So we have these other businesses that have popped up to do specialized recycling, which is great. Things can be recycled, but it takes separation, it takes time, and it takes a lot of effort to get there. And so going back, single stream versus source separated. A lot of places, and historically, we had source separated recycling, which equals clean recycling and very little contamination. So what we're doing here in Leavenworth is source separated. We're collecting just glass. And this is an image of what source separated glass looks like in comparison to single stream glass. And the single stream pile basically looks like garbage, right? And it takes a lot more work to create those other products. And so a lot of this mixed glass will go into other products that are not as sought after, like creating a new bottle. And so this is another reason why we're focusing on the collection of glass separately, because it creates clean, recyclable material that can be reused over and over again. When it's mixed like this, and it's predominantly garbage, it creates challenges in the entire system. And so that's why we continue to advocate for what we're doing now instead of, okay, why waste management, why can't you just get this back into your guidelines? And so that's something to pass on also to others. Any questions on that single stream recycling versus source separated? All right. And so when we saw that map of where the processing was and the manufacturing, we saw that there was a lot of spread across the board, across Washington and across the US. And so that has led to local and regional approaches by necessity. Some of the things that are happening, Chelan Glass 911 has a glass crusher that you can see here. It is full volunteer effort, which is really amazing to see what they have done. And they are removing a lot of glass from the landfill and putting it into beneficial reuse in many ways. And I spoke earlier about the challenge of crushed glass with those microplastics, and there are things in end products that you can put the crushed glass into that kind of dissolve those or mitigate those challenges. One of those things is putting crushed glass into bags to be used as sandbags. So that's one thought. There are even smaller scale things. This is the Manson High School students that started removing wine bottles from the area, and it's a glass crusher that you go bottle by bottle. And now this is actually in use at the Wenatchee Valley College campus. So they go bottle by bottle, crushing the glass and hopefully removing those labels too. And then over here is an image of the Met How Recycles folks who, like I mentioned before, they're also collecting and they're hauling over to Strategic Materials in Seattle. They are further away, but they have found a partnership with a local concrete company that is doing hauling over to Seattle, and so they can combine it with different backhauls, which is a great example of finding innovative solutions to some of these challenges like the distance. And so we really do need to think locally. We really do need to think regionally about this and be more creative and innovative. Yeah.
Ariana, it was a previous job I had. There was a lot of reluctance to engage in this because of the hazards related to dust. Mm-hmm. And some of the other factors that could be quite hazardous, and there's no real way to control that. This does not look like, if you've got a young lady there, the dust must not be an issue.
Yeah, and like any remanufacturing process, I would recommend personal protection equipment, even when you're cleaning out your attic, right? But yes, for anything that utilizes crushed glass or sand, even mixing concrete, all of those things, there's gonna be particulates that you should protect yourself from. But it can be mitigated. So those hazards can and are being mitigated across the world because crushing glass is a piece of the puzzle, no matter how you shape it. Yeah, so yes, it's good to be looked at and addressed and have it as a concern, but it shouldn't be a deal breaker, exactly, yeah.
Was the concern like the expense of mitigation?
Yeah, a lot of it, is just the economics behind it, and there's pretty strong concerns about the economics. But there was a reluctance because of some of the safety issues. Particularly, when the Chelan thing got going, we were asked to participate, and there was pretty high level of reluctance because of the safety issues there. And, it's local government, and so there needs to be, there is, concerns about liabilities that are taken pretty seriously by the local government. And so that was a big part of the deal.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
whether or not it's an actual deal breaker is, I just couldn't explore that far enough.
Yeah, in some areas, like we were looking at that map of the US at large, some areas are hundreds and hundreds and states away from manufacturing and reprocessing. And so glass crushing is really the best and only option to be able to reuse and recycle that glass in a way that keeps it out of the landfill and into beneficial reuse and saves on the raw materials, right? Once again, coming back to the life cycle, we're utilizing raw materials on a daily basis to create new glass. So how can we save those raw materials and those virgin materials from going into new products? I would say that the entire Wenatchee Valley is within that radius, that it makes it economically and environmentally sound to collect and haul over to strategic materials in Seattle or to Portland. So we're still close enough within that range that's I think what we should be looking at for our option. So what is being done? So Lissy alluded to, okay, what's being done policy-wide, right? So thankfully we have Zero Waste Washington. That is an organization that is really working to make systematic change for Washington State and to address all of these policies and to keep them moving forward. You probably noticed in one of the previous slides also that Washington did not have a blue ring around it. We're not a bottle bill state. There's 10 bottle bill states across the nation. Those bottle bill states have a much higher ability and capacity to recycle. So their rates are up into the 80-90% sometimes, whereas nationwide it's about 30%, and then probably here it's like 10% or less. But Zero Waste Washington is one to follow if you say, okay, I need an action item for this big picture. What can I do? How can I follow what's going on? Check out Zero Waste Washington. So the REWRAP Act was one of the opportunities that presented themselves. It did not advance through the legislature, but we're hoping to continue to move it forward. So this was the second year that it came through. And each year there's little tweaks. And each year we find out more of why something doesn't go through, right? There's always lobbyists or organizations that don't fully understand potentially the picture of how it could benefit them and are resistant to new things happening. But it's good to keep on your radar. So the REWRAP Act, when you hear that and see it coming up the next legislative season, think about supporting it and calling your representative and having them support it. It would require manufacturers and brands to reduce unnecessary packaging. It would fund statewide recycling. So recycling is something that doesn't have a lot of funding. It used to, right? You used to get funding back for those tin cans and the glass and all of that. But now if you're lucky, can break even, but oftentimes you lose money on it. And so something like this would support it statewide. And then it would ensure materials are actually being recycled. So recycling, like I mentioned before, often puts the burden on the consumer. And this is, how do we put it back on the manufacturers, right? Like, I want to eat that candy bar. It's not my fault that it's in a single-use packaging material. But how can we get the producer to say, okay, what is the life cycle of that packaging? Is it utilizing recycled content? Can it be recycled? And how can they take responsibility for that? The other one is the bottle bill. So like I mentioned, 10 states in the nation have a bottle bill right now. They have varying success, but overall it does contribute to much higher rates of glass recycling. So this would look like similar if you've been to Oregon and seen the deposit boxes or like a reverse vending machine. And so it would tack on a 10 cents charge for each can or bottle purchased in Washington. And this would, once again, put more funding into the whole conversation at large. And so any funding, that isn't recouped from consumers that buy those, it goes into a fund that can help support recycling and glass reuse and all of the other things in our state that need funding. Because that's the challenging part, right, for city government and our communities, is how do we fund all these efforts and the services so that it's not just putting it on the consumer and on our community members. Coming down the pipe, we do want to expand operations and collect more glass from our community, because we see it being thrown in the garbage and it's heartbreaking, and so we want to collect and haul more. So we're in the process of looking at a pilot project that would be a bicycle carried glass pickup from tasting rooms and restaurants downtown. Essentially, a restaurant or a business could sign up for pickup weekly or bi-weekly, and then that glass would be carried to the recycling center and then hauled to Strategic Materials in Seattle. So we are looking at expanding, which is exciting.
So you have volunteers riding bicycles?
So we would likely, that's the other piece, right? Volunteers. We've all been there. We could use volunteers always, Bob, on bicycles. So a lot of these efforts in Waste Loop at large take volunteer effort. They're volunteer driven, they're grassroots driven. Some of them are completely run by volunteers. But I always try and engage the conversation of how do we create a partnership and collaboration with local government to provide these services so that we don't have to be on the backs of volunteers, because it is a service that should be provided to our community. We shouldn't have to rely on volunteers to provide these services. And so volunteers can contribute, and we love volunteer hours, and it creates community, right? It creates community around our values of sustainability and environmentalism, but we need that partnership and collaboration from local government to actually have it be sustainable and to grow so that it can cover the entire community. So yes on volunteers, but taking it with a grain of salt. Okay, going back, just a review. Once again, we have been talking a lot about recycling, but I'm gonna hop back to reuse. And I'm closing in on time. So I'll go through this quickly. John Morrison from ZEWA was unable to be here this evening, but he has been devoting a lot of his time to look at the opportunities for upcycling. There was an Eastern Washington Glass Summit last year that the Department of Ecology hosted. Everyone was talking about recycling, and he was the one person there that said, what about reuse, right? And I was like, oh my gosh, yes. Let me introduce myself. And it was really exciting to have somebody tackling that, because we should be thinking about reuse. It happens across the world and across the nation, but there are a lot of barriers. So upcycling, there's an 85% lower carbon footprint, 82% less water, 92% less energy. The list goes on and on of the benefits for upcycling and reuse. So ZEWA John started the efforts. He launched a pilot bottle washing facility. He signed up over 20 brands of glass reuse, processed thousands of bottles. He delabeled a lot of the bottles in his own kitchen. I've been there, I feel him. It's a lot of work. And then he tested reverse logistics for curbside service and public collection sites. So there was a lot of movement. And like I mentioned before, right, we have sometimes one step forward and a few steps back. And that's the case in these reuse efforts. So although he has made a lot of great strides in his efforts, he's met a lot of barriers and challenges with it. So despite the accomplishments, so I'll go back there, despite the accomplishments, he faces challenges in securing funding for the ambitious projects. And this has led to a shift in ZEWA's focus. Instead of looking at reuse locally, they're looking at software development to support others in this glass recycling reuse sphere. So as they navigate the hurdles, ZEWA remains dedicated to their mission of driving positive change in waste management practices and fostering a more sustainable future. So he's still at it on a personal level, but the barriers, particularly due to time, I'm just going to skip over these ones. Going to the challenges, the funding is really a challenging piece because of the lack of infrastructure. We saw that map of the few and far between remanufacturing and processing facilities, and glass is so heavy, and because we have to have those local and regional solutions, it makes it really challenging to have funding on that level and on that scale, and then to scale up. So that infrastructure and funding. And then there's also government subsidies and support for landfills. The haulers make money to haul our garbage, right? And unfortunately, it's just the case. There's a lot of funding that goes to support landfills and waste removal. And so when we think back to that pie chart of that opportunities of 20%, just in Leavenworth, of 20% of our waste being glass, if we could change the funding that goes to disposing of that waste, right? We pay tipping fees on the pound. If we could put that funding into glass recycling, into glass reuse, into all of these rethinking possibilities, then we would be able to break down some of these other barriers. So collective and collaborative action is needed. At Waste Loop and at the recycling center, what we're doing right now is filling a niche, but it's not kind of our dream vision. We don't want to be a hauler of glass. Really, we're just filling the spot as needed. We're filling services as needed. And it costs us, and one of the reasons I wanted to come here was to open transparency about the challenge. It costs Waste Loop $500 to haul 2 strategic materials every haul. And we are hauling 2 to 3 weeks with the amount of glass that's coming in. We accept donations to help cover the costs, but we get about half of that. So every month we're losing money to provide this service for the community, which becomes more and more challenging. We're predominantly grant funded, which is program funded, and then the donations, like I said, help offset the costs. But what we're looking for is that partnership and collaboration and collective action of how can we scale this to make it make sense for the entire Wenatchee Valley, and how can we collaborate on making it economically feasible? And so maybe it's removing the amount of funding that we spend on the landfill, right? That's the one of the ideas as we continue to remove that from our waste stream. There's lots of other opportunities there. So I'm putting it out there to you all and into the universe that we need help. And that's one of my missions here, is just to open up the conversation that I know you all have worked for small nonprofits before, and many of you do right now. And transparency and communication is key, I think. I think people need to know the challenges that we face so that we can work together to solve these problems. And that's it that I have for this evening. Are there any questions?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I understand that the Solid Waste Council is broadening its membership. It's no longer the county and the municipalities, that there are involved groups. Is there potential for Waste Loop to be on the Solid Waste Council now? Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, so I've been in touch
What's going
with
on?
Chris, and I have attended several of the meetings, and I'm hoping to continue to stay engaged. They have been receptive to potentially partnering, particularly on location, of being able to have a larger location that we could collect glass at, and so looking at places that the county has that maybe we could fill that niche with. So yes, being a part of the council, I hope Waste Loop can do to engage in this conversation on the county-wide scale.
And then there was funding, my memory is pretty sketchy on this, there's the crop, the
Crop Act.
yeah, the outreach plan.
Yeah.
I can't remember what the acronym stands for. But there's an outreach plan with attendant funding from the college for reaching out to communities about how to improve recycling capacity. Is there potential for Waste Loop to access some of that funding?
Yeah, we're open to all of those opportunities. And, so we have some funding from the Department of Ecology for recycling education in our community.
Yeah.
Of course, education is a foundational piece, but I want to continue to go back to those partnerships with local government and how it's a service that we're providing, and how I'm looking forward to local government and others stepping into that role of helping to provide that service. Because yes, we could find more funding and we can continue to piecemeal it together, but it needs to happen on a larger scale. And I think it needs more players, really. We're just a small nonprofit, and our mission is really that education piece. And we bring things to the surface, those icky things that people don't want to see, the white elephants in the room, the garbage, the recycling. We bring it to the surface and hope that we can help work as a community collaboratively to address the challenges. But we can't take them on, our own into the future. So, yeah.
Local government can.
Local government can. Yeah.
I better stop.
No, it's great. I mean, we need more representative.
Talk about education and outreach. It's in the local government that there are actually potential for savings. There's this whole thing about the glass, taking it out of waste stream, and the savings of the tipping costs,
Yeah.
the tipping fees. So it's economics that count.
Most definitely.
That's the driver.
Yeah.
It's one of the drivers.
Yeah, no, and it's a great point. Oftentimes the waste characterization studies or the waste audits shed light on the opportunities for diversion, and that economic piece is one that a lot of people, that's the kicker that will move them over the finish line. A great example of that was we worked with the local school district, and there wasn't a realization of how much money they were actually spending on disposal. And if you remove that garbage, then you have funding to put towards diversion. And then on top of that, not only could you cover diversion and cover recycling, but you might even have some extra funds that you can put towards other sustainability efforts. And it's better for the environment and the community and all of the other things. So there's multiple layers in there. But I think that's a great point of, with the audiences, such as local government, of focusing on that as a high piece of how we can be more economically sound and fiscally responsible for the constituents, because it's taxpayers' money that is going into hauling our garbage. It's going into removing our waste out of sight, out of mind, into our local landfill that has less than 80 years left, right, in East Wenatchee. So let's start at the top and rethink. Yeah. Yep.
Do we pay strategic materials to take the glass? And then the second part to the question, how does aluminum compare to glass in terms of our choices that we have?
Good question. So Strategic materials, they actually pay us some per pound of the glass that we bring. We pay the hauler $500 per haul, and we get back about $65 per haul. So it's not nothing, but it is very small in what we're getting back. And then in terms of aluminum, I would say is one of the second best choices. It does not have that leaching capacity that, or most aluminum, if it's not lined with plastic, doesn't leach harmful chemicals into your food or beverage, and it has more recycling opportunity so that it does not degrade as quickly as plastics. So I would say that is a second choice. And sometimes it also depends on where you're living, right? Or where you're at. As we saw in those areas that there's no access to glass recycling at all, maybe they have small scale solutions, but maybe take that bottle with you or buy an aluminum can and recycle it there locally. Yeah, local and regional options, yeah.
If you have an aluminum can and it has a little nitro thing in the middle of it, how is that recycled? Do I have to cut the can apart before I stick it in the recycling bin?
You do not. Don't. So it's not recyclable, but in the process, that small thing won't break the system for contaminants. These processing facilities get so many contaminants that if you are able to give mainly like 80% recycled content, that is great because they're receiving kids' toys, mattresses, dead animals, like very strange things. All of these things, sometimes it's wishful recycling, sometimes it's people not caring at all what's going into their recycling. So if you can, like I said, get your recycled content in your single stream as high as possible, you are doing a great job. So that lime in your glass bottle, that's fine. We just try our best to reduce the contamination because it makes it, like I said, we saw that picture, it makes it harder on every step. It makes you use more energy. It makes everything more challenging when there's contamination. So the rule of palm for recycling also is that anything smaller than the palm of your hand will often end up as contamination, and often ends up as contamination in any glass recycling. So you can't recycle anything smaller than the palm of your hand.
So if I cut that can up,
yeah,
it becomes a small piece.
Yeah, and in the end, at those sorting facilities, there's like 30 people that are hand sorting. So safety is definitely something to keep in mind. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm happy to talk trash all night. Any other questions? All right, thank you.